husbands, her mother, a lover, and 11 children. Was she one of the most unlucky people to ever live? Or was she one of England's first serial killers? I'm Mick Biddick, and this is History is Criminal. In this episode, we take a look at the alleged crimes of Mary Ann Cotton, a woman whose death seemed to follow throughout her 41 years. Mary Ann Robson was born in 1832 in County Durham, England. Life was not easy for her. Her father died in a mining accident when she was just 8 years old. Her mother soon remarried a man named Stott. The relationship between Mary Ann and her stepfather was not a loving one, so at age 16 she left home to find work. She reportedly worked as a nursemaid and Sunday school teacher before meeting and marrying a man named William Mowbray, a coal miner, in 1852. While accounts vary on the total number of children she had with Mowbray, the number is somewhere between 9 and 11, depending on the source. However, by the mid-1860s, all of her children had died except 4. At this time, the family decided to take out a life insurance policy on Mowbray and the remaining children. It's not recorded whose idea this was to buy the insurance policy, but there is no question as to who benefited. On June 24th, 1864, their daughter, Mary Ann Mowbray, age 4, died. She was followed later that year by her 1-year-old brother, Robert John, on the 22nd of September. Both children were said to have died from gastric fever. These deaths, like the deaths of her other children, raised no questions. It was the late 1800s, and the Mowbrays were a working-class family. Disease and death was common among the working class in the English coalfields. Then, in January of 1865, William died of a sudden illness, gastric fever. Gastric fever was common among the poor and working class of the 1800s. Typhoid fever, gastric fever, and food poisoning ran rampant through the population. Unclean water sources, poor sanitation would cause typhoid epidemics with regularity. The symptoms of all three of these look much like the effects of arsenic poisoning. This was just one of the reasons that arsenic was the poison of choice among killers of the 1800s. The widowed Mary Ann then moved with her 2 remaining children, Mary Janet and Isabella, to Seaham Harbor. There she met and started an affair with an engaged man named James Nattrass. While Nattrass married the other woman, he and Mary Ann would remain in close contact for the rest of his life. Alone with 2 children to support in Seaham, she started to work as a nurse at the Sutherland Infirmary. The insurance payout from the death of her children and husband equaled little more than 6 months' worth of wages, hardly a fortune, and as a woman, her employment options would be limited. Unfortunately for him, while at the infirmary, she met George Ward, a patient of hers. Ward was quite taken with the young nurse, and the couple married in 1865. Ward had health issues throughout the marriage, but his doctors believed he was getting better. Then Ward took out a life insurance policy, reportedly at the behest of Mary Ann, and in May of that same year, her daughter, Mary Janet, passed away. Then on October 2nd of 1866, Ward died of gastric fever. His doctors were shocked because Ward seemed to have been greatly improving just before his passing. Once more, Mary Ann would benefit from a small insurance payout. Mary Ann now sent her only remaining child, Isabella, to stay with her mother, Miss Stott, and her stepfather. Mary Ann was no fan of her stepfather, but she may have felt the girl needed a more stable home. It's also possible the child was just a burden slowing her down. In any case, she was now widowed for the second time and childless. The insurance money would go fast, so she needed some income. As luck would have it, a local shipyard foreman had just recently lost his wife and needed a housekeeper to care for himself and his 5 children. Mary Ann found herself in the employment of James Robinson. Okay, now I realize it's the 1860s, but maybe check some references here. And if they're all dead, hire someone else. Shortly after Marianne took the job, John Robinson's 10-month-old son became ill. He died on the 4th of January, 1867. Robinson then sought comfort in the arms of Marianne, and Marianne found herself pregnant, which in 1867 would mean a quick wedding to avoid the scandal. However, before a wedding could take place, Marianne received word that her mother was deathly ill. She traveled to take care of her dying mother, but it was too late. Her mother passed away just 9 days after Marianne's arrival. She then returned to Robinson's home, bringing Isabella. Marianne, now very pregnant, married Robinson. But, as it would seem to happen around Marianne quite a bit, tragedy struck once again. In quick succession, two more Robinson children die, James and Elizabeth. Then Marianne's only remaining child from her first marriage, Isabella, followed less than a month later. All three had begun to complain of severe stomach pain shortly after Marianne returned to the Robinson household. The marriage then turned sour. Robinson discovered that Marianne had been pawning items he had given her. Robinson's remaining son from his first marriage had told his father that Marianne had sent him to pawn various things from the household. Robinson also found out that Marianne was borrowing money on his credit. Now, married women of the day, of course, could not borrow money on their own credit. So her only recourse to find money would have been to try and borrow money in her husband's name. Causing even more suspicion was the fact that Marianne had been trying to pressure Robinson into buying life insurance policies. Whether he was cheap, lucky, or smart, Robinson refused to buy the policies. Some sources say Robinson threw her out of the house in 1869. Others claim she left. They agree that she cleared out the bank account on her way out the door. It is also unclear if she took the newborn with her. At least one source says that she took the child but later abandoned it and it was returned to Robinson. In either case, the child died of seemingly natural causes not long after returning to his home. Once again, husbandless and childless, Marianne turned to an old friend, Margaret Cotton, for help. Margaret was at that time living with her brother, Frederick. Introductions were made, and by 1870, she was again pregnant. Cotton would become Marianne's fourth, final, and bigamous husband. It seems she and Robinson were still legally married. In 1871, Marianne Cotton, her husband, their new baby, and Cotton's two sons from an earlier marriage moved into their own home and took in a boarder. That boarder? Joseph Nattrass. Rumor has it that Marianne and her former lover picked up right where they had left off. It was then that Frederick Cotton contracted gastric fever. After a brief but violent illness, he died on the 19th of September, 1871. But not before, you guessed it, taking out a life insurance policy, naming Marianne as the beneficiary. While this would seem to clear the way for her to marry her lover, Nattrass, some more deaths hit. First, Cotton's eldest son, the 10-year-old Frederick Jr., died, and then the 14-month-old baby, Robert, died, followed by their aunt Margaret. Nattrass really should have taken the chance to run at this point, but like a moron, he stayed. Not only did he stay, but he wrote a will leaving everything to Marianne. The topper? He also took out a life insurance policy, naming Marianne and his two sons from his earlier marriage as beneficiaries. And I just got to wonder, did he hate his sons? In 1872, Marianne was living with Cotton's 6-year-old son, Charles Edward. The local parish was giving her an allowance to care for the boy. While a small sum, it seemed like the good Christian thing to do, taking care of widows and orphans, and this was the old two birds with one stone situation. Now, Marianne did find a new job working for a Mr. Quick Manning at a brewery. And in the classic Marianne fashion, she got pregnant with Quick Manning's child. The overseer of the parish asked if she was going to marry Quick Manning. Marianne said she would, but the boy, Charles Edwards, was in the way. Then she made what the overseer saw as an odd statement. I won't be troubled long. He'll go as the rest of the Cotton family. Should the overseer have gone to the authorities right then? Well, maybe. People seem to be dropping around this woman faster than panties at an Usher concert, and now she predicts the death of her stepson. But should have, could have, would have. They don't, and a week later, Charles Edwards dies. The doctor in charge of the inquest at first refused to issue a death certificate. This would mean that the insurance company couldn't issue a burial benefit. However, just 24 hours later, the doctor reversed his decision and issued a certificate stating that the death was from natural causes. The autopsy, in this case, was really just a quick visual scan of the body with no outward signs of trauma. It was reason there was no need to look further. It was only then that the parish overseer decided to act. They relayed their conversation with Marianne to not only the police, but to the doctor and the press. Quickly, local newspapers ran with the story, and it became even national news. The Victorian age was wild about crime, and in this age of yellow journalism, the media spoon-fed them all the gore and murder they could find. With pressure mounting, the local authority got an order to exhume Charles's body. The boy's stomach was removed and sent to an analytical chemist. Tests were performed and returned the result of positive for arsenic. Now, arsenic, it should be noted, was everywhere in the 1800s. It was the preferred poison of the day. It was inexpensive, easily found, and until the mid-1830s, untraceable. Paint, wallpaper, medications, beauty products all contained arsenic. It was used in pest control and weed removal. Poisonings were commonplace, both murder and accidental. In 1858, 15 people died from eating ice cream at a party that was accidentally laced with arsenic. I don't know how that happens. Someone's like, oh, is this chocolate sprinkles or arsenic? I can't tell. So while the presence of a small amount of arsenic itself might not have been enough to open a full-blown investigation in Marianne's past, when teamed with the statement, it was. Marianne was arrested and charged with the murder of Charles Edward Cotton. It was at this time that it came to light that Nattrass had left a will just before he died of gastric fever, naming Mary as the beneficiary. An order was issued to exhume Nattrass's body. Even though the body had been in the grave for months, it was quite well preserved, and the internal organs were in great shape. Well, for a dead guy's internal organs. His stomach was also sent to the chemist, where traces of arsenic were found. The charge of murder for Nattrass was then added to her. A neighbor came forward, claiming that Marianne had asked her to buy arsenic for her. The arsenic was to be used to get rid of bed bugs. The neighbor also said that she had helped Marianne apply the poison to the beds and never saw any bugs. Now, whether this is just juicy gossip or factual information, hard to say. The question of how many victims began being asked. Newspapers across England were running with the story of the Angel of Death. The Wales Chronicle wrote, Marianne Cotton, a widow, is in custody at the West Auckland, charged with having poisoned her stepson, age 8. It is said that the prisoner, who is comparatively young, had 3 husbands and 15 children, and that they all, as well as 2 lodgers, died under her roof. It was also said that she, quote, poisoned wholesale those who ought to be most dear to her. With these stories going around, they decided it was time to dig up some corpses. They had some trouble, however. Frederick Cotton and his children had been buried in paupers' graves. Over a dozen children's graves were dug up before they found 2 caskets with the names of the Cotton children on them. These remains were also found to have traces of arsenic. When they failed to locate Frederick's grave, or the graves of any of the other Cotton children, the search was called off, not wanting to disturb any more of the dead. When she was arrested, Mary Ann was 7 months pregnant with Manning's child. It turns out he might have been the lucky one in this story. The pregnancy would delay the trial. Remember, justice moved quick in the 1800s. Now she faced 4 murder charges: Charles Edward, Natras, and the 2 other exhumed Cotton children. In March 1873, her trial would start. The papers ran daily updates on the trials. Her defense team was far from stellar. She was able to hire legal aid who seemed mostly to just tell her to sell her belongings in order to pay for an actual lawyer. He advised her to say nothing about the deaths, not even to try and give an excuse or alibi. Then he failed to find a defense lawyer, and the court appointed her counsel only 2 days before the trial started. Due to the lack of funds and time, he was unable to find any witnesses for her defense. The prosecution, like the papers, painted her as a promiscuous woman who killed for profit. Even though she was not charged with the other deaths that had occurred around her, these deaths were allowed in as evidence. The pharmacist was brought in who told the jury he had sold Mary arsenic. His story fell apart, though, on cross-examination when it was learned that the police had encouraged him to identify Mary Ann. The chief judge also allowed local gossip and hearsay to be introduced to the jury. The defense had an uphill battle to fight. One local paper had summed up what they were against. All accused are innocent until proven guilty, they said. But then they added a big however and proceeded to explain how all the deaths surrounding her clearly meant she was guilty. The defense put up a fight, though. They explained that arsenic was everywhere in their society, including in paint and on toys and cribs. In fact, just decades earlier in England, arsenic panic had hit as 158 people died, with their deaths being linked to arsenic poisoning in 1837 and 1838. Surely accidental poisonings were common. The defense even brought up the question of motive. The insurance for Charles Edwards covered little more than the cost of burial, and as for Natras, it was rumored that he was going to marry her, so why would she kill him? The chief judge stepped in to tell the jury that they should dismiss the questions of motive as being irrelevant. I'm not an English judge from the 1870s, but aren't the big 3 motive, means, and opportunity? The defense also claimed that the prosecution cannot produce a single witness who saw her putting arsenic in anyone's food, although it was testified that she was the only person who cared for Charles Edwards and the only one to prepare his meals. Had the defense been better prepared, it might not have mattered. Her guilt was a foregone conclusion. She was sentenced to be hung on the 24th of March, 1873. While in jail, she wrote her only living and still legally married to husband, James Robinson. The letter was published on the 17th of March, 1873 in the Manchester Evening News. Littered with spelling and grammar errors, it shows Mary Ann's limited education. In the letter, she asked Robinson to bring the 3 children by to see her. She also asked if he would try and help spare her life. There was a petition for clemency circulating. In the letter, she also points some of the blame at him, stating that her trouble started when he kicked her out. This would seem to ignore the deaths that occurred before then. Throughout the short letter, she professed her innocence. I could find no evidence of Robinson's reply to this letter. It would seem unlikely that he would send his 3 children to see their stepmother, who had been condemned to death for the murdering of her stepchild, her lover, and 2 other stepchildren. It's reasonable to assume that Robinson never replied. On March 24th, she was taken to the gallows. It was reported that she remained stoic and said a prayer. It had been just under 90 years since the jail had executed another woman, and that hanging went so poorly they had to hang the poor woman twice in less than an hour. Mary Ann's would also not go smoothly. They were using a short rope, which is just what it sounds like. It's a short rope for hanging a person, so short, in fact, that when Mary Ann dropped, it failed to break her neck. So her death would be slow and painful until the hangman finally pushed down on her shoulders, ending her life. On March 25th, the day after the hanging, the Huddersville Chronicle and West Advertiser ran a story claiming she had confessed to the murders of Charles Edward. Reverend Mounsford of Wesleyan had gone to give comfort to the condemned woman. He had asked her about the boy's death, to which she replied, "I believe that I have poisoned the boy." When pressed about the other deaths, she just turned away and never answered. The newspapers reported this as an admission of guilt to all the murders. Was she confessing by saying, "I believe"? Was she admitting guilt, or just saying that somehow the arsenic must have come from her? In any case, it is far from a blaring declaration of guilt. Was Mary Ann Cotton a cold-blooded serial killer, or was she a woman with horrendously bad luck in a time where poison was literally everywhere? It would seem that the amount of death that followed her would cause us to lean towards the former. No matter what, she was definitely a tragic figure. This has been History is Criminal. Join us in 2 weeks as we take a look at another Mary, this time the ill-fated voyage of the Mary Russell, a story of madness on the high seas.